So, Dave, last week, Meta announced a new product called Vibes. And as far as I can tell, because I don't fully understand this thing, but it's some sort of like AI only like slop social network just for passing around AI generated things.
TikTok, but with no people.
Yeah. But using that as a prompt, and we looked and it doesn't quite have a prompt of itself. I just wanted to ask you, how are your vibes?
My vibes are actually pretty good. It's October 1st, so it's fall.
Yeah.
Which means the trees are changing color. And I like that. I like when it's kind of 60 degrees outside. It's just nice. The madness of everything is easier to bear. So my vibes are pretty good. How are your vibes?
Nice. That's good. My vibes are, I mean, I guess it is nice that it's fall, but the world is kind of not great right now.
Yeah. I suppose I gave you a tactical answer. Presuming a not great world locally, it's nice.
Sure.
It's cooler and the trees are orange.
All right. Well, we'll go with that. Hello and welcome to Ctrl-Alt-Speech, your weekly roundup of the major stories about online speech, content moderation, and internet regulation. It is October the 1st, 2025, and this week we are talking about internet fragmentation around the globe, some rules around AI chatbots, and maybe a little something about an impossibility theorem that I came up with once before. I am Mike Masnick. I am the editor of TechDirt. As you will have noticed if you are listening to this and you are not hearing the British accent of Ben. Ben is off this week. Both of us were off last week, so we are back, or I am back. Ben is still off. He will be back next week. For me, I was off last week because I was at the Stanford Trust and Safety Research Conference, which was excellent. And because we needed a guest host for this week, I decided to drag back with me the keynote speaker on day one of the Stanford Trust and Safety Research Conference, which was Dave Wilner. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Mike. And hello, folks.
Dave, for people who don't know, well, people should know you, first of all. I think most people
I think if you listen to this podcast, there's a higher than normal chance that they are aware.
Just in case people haven't, Dave has worked everywhere and is one of the originators, I will give you credit for, of sort of trust and safety. You were sort of the first content policy person at Facebook. Is that correct?
Yeah. I can do the quick.
Okay.
The TLDR is it's all my fault, but
Yes.
the slightly longer version is that I was Facebook's 12th content moderator.
Okay.
And before that was resetting people's passwords by hand. And we didn't have any rules. We needed some rules. So I ended up writing a lot of those initial rules, which evolved into the first content policy standards and content policy team that grew quite a lot over the years before I left. Then worked at Airbnb for 6 years. We're building out their community policy team and also working on their quality and training programs. And then was at OpenAI for the launch of DALL-E, ChatGPT, and GPT-4. And left. It ended up at Stanford, and now I'm doing my own thing.
Yes, your own very interesting thing, we should know.
Yes.
Which has a trust and safety hook into it. And you gave the keynote, your company, but we should mention it, is called Zentropy, and is using AI in the trust and safety space.
Yeah. We fine-tuned a very small large language model, which is a funny thing to say.
Yes.
Small is relative here. You could run it on your MacBook Air. That is a special purpose model designed to do a very good job of following content policies and giving you back a faithful judgment as to whether or not an example you provide violates or does not violate the sort of criteria, or rather, better way to say it, meets or does not meet the criteria you have set out. It's just giving you a yes, no.
A very binary answer.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's really quick. So if you need more gradations, just run it more times.
Right.
And then we've also built a system that uses that capability to help you more clearly explain the standards you're trying to write
yes.
for it to follow using guidance from the decisions you've made as applied to a bunch of examples you provide.
Right.
So it can help you figure out what you meant to say based on what you did.
Right. It can tell you your policy does not agree with your decision making.
Correct. Yes.
Which is kind of neat, actually.
It's quite neat.
Yeah.
It sounds a little technocratic, but it lets you get to a standard that works well much more quickly than has historically been the case.
Yeah.
And then you can go run it a lot.
Right.
With the magic robot.
Yes. Wonderful magic robot. And so you gave this keynote speech. And I guess in theory, based on the number of people who came up to me after you gave your keynote speech to ask me if I was okay with your keynote speech, we should address this.
Yes, we should. Yeah, I did warn Mike. I worry maybe my delivery was a little off. So I took as a framing for that speech a piece that you wrote, I think back in 2019, called Masnick's Impossibility Theorem.
Right.
The core contention of which is that content moderation at scale is impossible to do well.
Right.
And you had sort of three supporting reasons for that. And I used those three, your sort of three whys this was important to do well, which basically boiled down to one, people don't like experiencing moderation because they don't like being told that they shouldn't have posted what they posted because they think they should have posted what they posted because they posted it. So
exactly,
that makes folks mad, predictably. Two, we're kind of bad at figuring out what we're going to take down. So we mess up all the time. And three, basically the scale of the exercise means that even if everybody somehow liked it and we were pretty good at doing it, we would still appear incompetent because even if you make almost no mistakes statistically, you still make a lot of mistakes in reality if you do the thing millions or billions of times.
Right.
And I sort of, my framing of the speech was basically, I hate to say this, but Mike is right. That is true. We have been doing a bad job this whole time.
Yes.
But I think maybe the rise of generative AI and sort of large language multimodal models changes some of the constraints of how we design our trust and safety systems such that we might be able to get closer to the standard you set, which after all is doing it well, not doing it perfectly, which that's definitely not going to happen. But well is a social construct. Maybe we can get to well, right? Or at least a lot closer to well if you go through and re-examine in detail how exactly the tools we've had historically have constrained the systems we can build in ways that make them kind of shitty.
Right.
For lack of a better way of saying it.
And I mean, yes, well is a sort of vague term. And some people have suggested that when I wrote the Masnick Impossibility Theorem piece, which has definitely been picked up and talked about a lot, that it was suggesting like, oh, everybody should give up. And that is never the intention. I always think that companies should be striving to do it better and should be looking for ways to do it better. I just wanted to set a kind of marker of like, what is it that we're targeting? Because so many of the discussions, especially in the media and among policymakers, was this impossible standard of how did you get this thing wrong? And, you know, the answer is it could be any number of things, including like it wasn't wrong, or it was one mistake we made out of a billion, leave us alone. You know, like,
yes. Well, and you're explicit about that in the piece.
Yeah.
It's very clear if you read it that it's a defense of the endeavor for non-experts who do not understand how that we're like over here climbing Mount Everest. And so sometimes people are going to get a little dizzy. Right. Like this thing is fundamentally an insane thing to be trying to do is not the same thing as saying, well, you don't have to try to do it. There are lots of things we do that are sort of faintly crazy seeming, but also deeply necessary for society to function. And this is one of those things. But in that context, you need to sort of think very carefully about what you can expect.
Yeah.
And we don't seem, it is, I think you are right. And you really shaped my thinking with the piece that our expectations around this in the technology sphere, I think are downstream of the view that computers are essentially magic.
Right.
Like Arthur C. Clarke was right. Like functionally, the computers are all magic. And so everybody is irritated when the wizards don't do magic better, but it's not actually magic.
Right.
It's basically just a bunch of math. And so it has limits and features and constraints. And your piece very, I think, skillfully illustrates the constraints of this system and how it is in fact not magical. It is a process.
Right.
And like all processes is flawed and produces a lot of failure.
Right. And sort of the aim of your keynote was, as you put it, I believe, to make Mesnick wrong again.
Yes.
And so,
which was a bad framing because you've never been wrong, unfortunately.
It's fine. It has that flow, which I get and I appreciate. And we'll look over we'll ignore the again part.
Well, I mean, the golden ages are largely a myth.
Yes,
so.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was a really good keynote. It really sort of opened up this idea of like, look, there are massive changes that are afoot, and we can move the ball in a significant way towards building better trust and safety content moderation type systems.
Yeah, at a minimum, we should take a real hard crack at it.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of reason to expect that is true. And I think there's increasing evidence that it's true in some of the domains, some of which tie into this project. I mean, I'm working on a thing that is an attempt at that. And so are you. I mean, frankly, Blue Sky and the larger focus on decentralization, I think AI makes more viable as a project, and that decentralization is potentially a way of addressing the sort of appearance of incompetence by having more people be involved in the decision-making and spreading out the mistake-making that we're going to do.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, it was a good keynote. I enjoyed it, even if I was the foil, and people felt
the frame. You were not the foil. You were the organizing intellectual structure.
Okay, so many people came up to me like, "Where did you know he was going to?"
I did warn you,
yes,
but I think I warned you like 8 minutes before I started talking.
Yeah. You had suggested a week before, like, "Hey, I might mention you," and then right before the keynote was about to go on, you're like, "You know how I said I might mention you." It's actually
things got
wildly
more out of hand. Yeah, when I said I might mention you, I was just starting to think about it, and then I went away for 6 days and wrote a speech and came back and was like, "Oops."
Anyways, all right, let's get on to our news stories of the week. I think we wanted to start. We're going to talk a little bit about the UK and a couple different stories there, and sort of I will get into what I think it means. But do you want to give the quick summary of what you found?
Okay, so one of these stories, which was reported, I think, this morning in the Financial Times, is that the UK is renewing its attempts to compel Apple to build a backdoor into encryption for advanced data protection. There had been an attempt at this, I think, back in September that became of last year. Of last year. Yes, that's right. That it became a bit of a football between the US and the UK, and the US responded with pressure and the British eventually backed off. And this reporting is that it's sort of bubbling back up again, although this time there's a couple of interesting differences. One, the request is allegedly scoped only to British users of Apple services instead of everybody in the world. And two, the article ends sort of somewhat ominously. It's actually worth reading verbatim. Members of the U.S. delegation raised the issue of the request to Apple around the time of Trump's visit, according to 2 people briefed on the matter. However, 2 senior British government officials said the U.S. administration was no longer leaning on the UK government to rescind the order. And it just kind of leaves it there, which is interesting. And then the other story worth reacting to as a package was the announcement that Imgur is, or seemingly already has, pulled out of the UK entirely in reaction to an investigation by the Information Commissioner's Office around, I believe, their handling of users' personal data.
Yeah.
But sort of very suddenly has withdrawn entirely, and as of now is unavailable in the UK completely. Yeah.
And both of these stories are interesting. They're different, but they're both sort of, UK based and sort of things that are happening in the UK. We've talked on the podcast a bunch about things around the Online Safety Act, and it's notable. This is not an Online Safety Act thing.
Neither of them.
Right. Neither of these are. This is not an Ofcom thing. These are just sort of other regulations that are happening in the UK that are sort of going after American tech companies in some form or another. The Apple story, it's also sort of hard to get full details on because all of it is secret. It's like the same thing happened last year, and then all of the proceedings about it were secret. So it's basically what gets leaked to reporters. And both of them are just situations where the UK is trying to enforce its will, whether for good or for bad. You can argue either way, I guess, on American tech companies and sort of how they're responding to it. And, there's a concern, and I've raised this in other contexts, but we're seeing it more and more about how, because of these sort of local laws and local focus and local demands, what we think of as the internet and access to the internet is different depending on where you are. And the idea of a sort of global open internet is potentially going away, or is maybe gone, depending on who you talk to. Certainly in some places it is. But seeing countries like the UK, which Ben is not here, so we can rag on the UK, I guess, without anyone pushing back.
Yes.
That's not.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is interesting to see this increasing fragmentation, and it's long been the case that there was fragmentation around the edges.
Yeah,
but it feels like it's reaching further and further into the core of the parts of the internet that were more previously open.
Yeah, and it concerns me in a number of different ways, right? So like Apple has responded, they responded to the original, again, secret order, which was apparently to build a backdoor into all the encryption by just not offering encryption at all. So basically making it clear to anyone who is storing their data that don't consider it safe. And their position is that they're continuing to do that. But it's basically, depending on where you are.
I think it was actually that they stopped letting new users on board. I don't know that they shut it down for existing users, which I think may be some of the hook for this current conflict.
Interesting. Okay. And so the more limited scope of just being for UK users to block this is interesting. The fact that the US is apparently okay with it is...
Well, I mean, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
Right? Like, this is what's so ominous about that end state is like, what it said was sort of, the US is no longer making a big deal out of it, but is that because they've changed their minds or because they're not paying attention?
Right. Because they did make a really big deal of it. And it was like one of the very few things that I gave the current US administration kudos for when it came about, which was that like, they did make a big deal of it, and they really sort of pushed the UK on it, and they took a victory lap on it, which, like one of the few well-deserved victory laps.
Yeah, you don't like to say you got to hand it to them.
Yes.
I think on this one, for whatever the motivations,
right,
the outcome seems correct.
Yeah. And the whole setup, this is true of some people in the US, and some government officials in the US, especially in the law enforcement side, have always had this sort of like anti-encryption bent, and this sort of feeling that like, well, bad people use encryption, therefore we should get rid of encryption in some form or another, which is really problematic. Very simplistic view of the world and very dangerous. Like, if you actually want privacy and security, encryption is a key part of that. And I think people who are arguing for doing away with encryption or putting in a backdoor, which, to be clear, is really getting rid of encryption. I think people have this belief that there's like some like neutral thing, which is like, gee, only the good people get access to the backdoors. It's just like technically not how it works. Yeah.
Yeah. My wife likes to joke that trust and safety the TNS stands for trade-offs and sadness.
Yeah.
And the entire encryption debate is a great trade-offs and sadness issue where you genuinely have difficult questions on both sides, and the choice is a very stark one where the sort of natural urge to seek compromise isn't possible because of the nature of the problem.
Yeah. The other statement that I love on the sort of encryption debate is the one that the cryptographer Matt Blaze made a long time ago, which showed up in a John Oliver clip. And I once asked Matt about it, and he's like, I don't even remember when I said it or where I said it, but somehow it was on video somewhere, and John Oliver's team found it, which was basically the, when people ask for backdoors and encryption and sort of say like, well, you techie guys, you should be able to figure it out. He said, it's kind of like asking, well, you've landed someone on the moon. Obviously, you can also land someone on the sun. It's like one of those things. One of those things is possible. One of those is not, and you sort of have to understand.
It depends on your success criteria.
Well, yes, sure, exactly, right? Yes, like in the same way that yes, you can create a backdoor, and it is safe as long as you consider safe exposing all of our data, and making it vulnerable to attack.
Although actually in the sun context, I guess it's not even that it's hot, right? The pressure of the solar radiation probably means we couldn't even get there with chemical rockets.
Yeah. So, we're getting out of my knowledge.
Yeah. My guess is actually we couldn't even land a liquid human mist on the sun, actually.
So anyways, it's a really tricky problem. But it worries me that we're seeing so much fragmentation among all of these things, right? And like, there was a time when we had the sort of known areas of fragmentation where like China had its Great Firewall, Iran sort of walled off the internet, Russia, wanted to wall off its internet. Like, okay, there are these sort of authoritarian countries. They're going to do what they're going to do. And we can sort of look from the more open West or whatever and sort of say like, that's not a good thing. But now we're seeing
and that wall building was aligned with the wall building that those countries would do in sort of the rest of their law.
Yes.
And so it's sort of maybe not desirable, but it's of a piece with the rest of the sort of way that those countries are governed in a way that feels sort of contained and not necessarily sort of bound up in the rest of the way the system works, because they were already sort of isolated pieces of the system in so many other ways.
Whereas the rest of the world was moving more and more towards globalization. And a part of that was certainly the internet making some aspects of the globalization more and more possible. And now we're seeing these cracks in the system. And I worry about what that means for a whole bunch of things beyond just like, are you able to encrypt your chats on your iPhone or whatever? I think it's a more serious issue when we're breaking the global open internet and where you have a different experience, different apps, different services available to you based on where you are. That doesn't lead to good places. And so I worry about that.
I think it's also likely to compound the sort of difficulty of doing any of this even passably, much less well. Right, because if we can't get our current approaches to doing, and I know these stories not directly about moderation, but like this sort of, if we can't get our current approaches to doing any of this to work at the scale they're currently working at, it seems to me that multiplying the difficulty by multiplying the number of rule sets that you're playing under gets really hard to do well really, really quickly. And it multiplies the sort of surfaces for collision and the possibilities of chaos and mistake very, very rapidly.
Yeah, which I think is a big concern. All right, well, I want to move on to our second story this week, which this one's from Business Insider. And it sort of ties back to a story from earlier this summer, which Reuters, I think, broke a story earlier this summer about Meta's chatbots and the guidelines that it had around more sexually explicit chats involving children. And it was pretty horrific is the sort of quick summary on that. And that because of that article, then there was sort of multiple investigations launched by the US government. The FTC demanded more information from a bunch of different AI chatbot companies to sort of talk about what rules they had in place. The Senate demanded some information as well. And so Meta was apparently late in delivering information to the government that was requested of it, but has started doing so. And some of that has now leaked to Business Insider, including its specific guidelines on how it is now training AI chatbots to respond to, as they put it, child sexual exploitation prompts. And this has gotten some attention, and it has some details about what is acceptable, what is unacceptable, and how some of those rules have apparently changed from where they were when Reuters reported on it earlier this year. But it's still a little bit of a mess. And I think...
Yeah, the revised standards don't seem great either, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, Yeah. But now, getting back to our theme here of impossibility, is it possible to have guidelines that are great?
Well, it depends what you mean by great. So I do think it is possible to write standards more and less well from a clarity point of view.
Yes.
And I was struck in reading some of the quotes in Business Insider that I was not totally sure what they meant to mean.
Yes.
In some of the distinctions that they were drawing.
Which is interesting given your expertise.
Yes, but I am also a very persnickety reader and writer as a result of my expertise. Both the story back in the summer and this one did bring to mind to me, I like to try to explain how things go wrong when looking at these kinds of blowups using this idea called Hanlon's razor, which is basically the notion that you should never explain with malice what can be adequately explained by incompetence. And I sort of like to add on to that, you should never explain with incompetence what can be adequately explained by not having enough time to think the problem through, which is frequently what happens in the context of so much of trust and safety and content moderation generally. And looking at these stories, my immediate reaction was like, oh, they're having a fan fiction problem. They're having a problem where, so if you've read Harry Potter, particularly the 4th and 5th books, have a very significant amount of making out among people who are like 14 and 15 years old as a critical part of the plot. Now, it doesn't get any more explicit than that.
Right.
But that is like a core part of the story. And I suspected, looking at Meta's guidelines in the summer and the ones that they have now, that they were sort of writing under a bunch of constraints around, hey, we obviously don't want to make a CSAM machine, or we think we don't.
Right.
But we also don't want to prohibit the kinds of things that show up in young adult fiction intended for young adults, which society tolerates. And like, it went through a giant bureaucracy machine, and what came out the other side had some second order implications that were not cool and not what anybody sort of would have wanted, particularly given the general sort of headwinds there right now against overreach in the content moderation space. And and I think you still see that even in these revised versions, where they're clearly trying to draw a distinction between like more explicit sexual activity and romantic-ish activity. And they've now banned actual role play activity between anybody and bots under a certain age. And it's not to give like an apology for how it ended up there. It's more like, how do you understand what this is? Like, is this mustache twirling super villainy, or is this like something stupider and more subtle and difficult to solve? And it seems to me that they're having a problem kind of like the fan fiction problem in this context, meaning the problem that ended up with the creation of Archive of Our Own. This is like a old internet callback, but the fan fiction community writes a lot of horrifyingly explicit sexual content, frankly. And there's been schisms within that community about those things, and that does sometimes involve teenage characters. And it seems to me that we as a society like haven't figured out where we want the line to be between literature and chatbot pretend role play. And I think we want it to be at a different place. It feels different. But if you're working from prior art under time constraints inside one of these companies, I can see how you end up writing something that kind of accommodates what you know people are out there doing on the internet with sort of fictional characters when essentially playing dress up with their favorite characters in a literature form.
Right.
And that gets to some really weird places when you get interactive technology involved. And also, to your framing question of like, are good standards even possible to write, gets to this, the heart of this sort of lack of social consensus around some questions, because we do have issues where there's strong social consensus that we want those things moderated. Like, everybody hates spam, which is, not a morally horrifying thing. It's just advertising in the wrong place, and people find it universally irritating.
Right.
Pretty much everybody's on board with CSAM is bad. There are some boundary questions around what terrorism means, but like, broadly speaking, folks are like, yeah, ISIS was not cool, right? There are areas of strong consensus.
Right.
And then there are areas of like absolutely no consensus. And this feels like an area of low consensus smashing into a technological development that itself doesn't have any consensus about how we want it moderated yet, under time pressure, under corporate constraints, leading to some not awesome choices. So this is my like non-mustached villain version account of like, how the hell did that happen? Because you look at it from the outside and your reaction is like, what?
Right.
They did what? Right. It's almost like comic book evil. And comic book evil is rarely real in my experience, and particularly when you're dealing with big bureaucratic organizations.
Right. And as someone who's been in some of these rooms having these discussions, it's not people deciding like, oh, we're going to allow the worst possible things to be there, but we're trying to figure out a way to create a standard that works within. And so your assumption here is that people making these rules were kind of looking at the nature of fan fiction and sort of saying, how do we...
That's my sense. Yeah. Because a lot of, particularly if you look at Meta's products in this area, a lot of them are more in the sort of character AI as role play vein, right? They're not marketing or building products for productivity, right? They're not in the like, hey, you're going to use Meta AI through vibes or whatever to code up ironically, you're not going to use vibes to vibe code your next app that you're launching. It's in the entertainment space. And if you're thinking about entertainment interactions with chatbots, like particularly if they're adopting fictional personas, you're in that role play, creative fiction, creative remash space, right? That's the closest thing to a prior art to think about. It's where my mind would have gone. Now, I hope I wouldn't have missed the implications of this, but I don't think that's actually a nuts thing to start to think through if you're looking for prior attempts at grappling with some of these concepts.
Yeah. And there is a sort of interesting element of like, if this is okay in fan fiction, why is it not okay in a chatbot? And then you can pretty quickly figure out why, where it's just like, well, the interactive nature of it and the fact
different
is extremely different, and that it draws you in, and that it sort of builds on what you're suggesting to it creates a very, very different kind of product.
Yeah, I think it creates a very different kind of product. I also don't think there's strong social consensus that it necessarily is okay.
Right.
And like, I think fan fiction communities exist as it okay.
Also,
it is legal, but like Archive of Their Own exists, in my understanding, because of controversies around the degree of sexuality in stories.
Yes.
And so there's unsettled debate within that community that's been solved by forking. And because that's a relatively niche interest, like, I don't know if you dragged the fan fiction debates about this stuff out into the public and put them in Reuters, that people would be psyched about the lines that have been drawn.
That's a very, very good point. Yeah. Yeah. And
And so it's like it's a community that doesn't have full consensus within itself in a somewhat more socially marginal position. So there's low, broader social consensus around what the line even is here. And I think the line, like in published books, is somewhat different than the furthest lines in the fan fiction community. And then on top of it, you're adding in this sort of chaos agent that instead of a pre-scripted thing written by a human, you're interacting with this non-deterministic chat system, and who knows where that goes.
Yeah.
Or how exactly people relate to it psychologically.
Yeah. Do you think if your contention is that the time pressure was an element in sort of drafting these rules, do you think that having the FTC and the US Senate involved will lead to better rules?
So I do think, well, and to be clear, I don't know that time pressure here was the constraint so much as it was being cross-pressured.
Okay.
Right? That you're under multiple competing demands that are hard to reconcile. It's more your question of like, are perfect rules possible? And like, I'm not sure on some of these things that perfect reconcilability is possible.
Right.
Right. Like that, it just may be difficult to square the circle in some cases. And sometimes you pick the square and you should have picked the circle. And know under those, know when that is going on, generally speaking, having the government yelling at you does not make people calmer or better at thinking from my personal experience.
I'm sort of trying to project out, and you can sort of see the likely end result of obviously the government cracking down on this kind of stuff is much more stringent rules and much greater limits on sort of how people can use chatbots in certain ways. And I'm kind of trying to project out into a future where we're going to be, I don't know, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, where the very same people in the government, God, I hope they're not still in government, but assuming some of the same people are still in the government, then freak out because something more culture war-y, someone will try and do something with a chatbot and get denied. And,
oh, that's definitely going to happen.
We're going to have somebody stand up and be like, why is OpenAI so woke and not allowing this? And the whole we'll trace back to this conversation now.
I think that is probably true. I mean, I think we've already had versions of that.
Right.
The Google racially diverse Nazis blow up from like last year was a good example of that. And that one to me very much did read as mediocre solutions put in place under intense time pressure to launch, leading to weird, stupid outcomes, not as a sort of intentional stance that anybody wanted to be in, because it was obviously not sustainable.
Right.
To be in the racially diverse Nazis actually business was not going to hold up.
Yeah.
And also not clear why it would even be desirable.
Right.
But yeah, I do think we are inevitably going to face that, because back to your core point, you're making a lot of decisions. You're drawing some lines that are very difficult to split apart.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, even it's actually interesting on the meta thing, both in their prior guidance and in the current guidance, they talk a lot about Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
Which is a book about two teenagers who fall in love,
yes,
get sexually involved, and then kill themselves.
Yes.
But it's by Shakespeare, so it's classy, so it's fine.
Right.
Because it's old.
Yes.
Right? And we have complicated and inconsistent feelings about those things, and particularly where they intersect with art.
Yeah.
So much of that is, it's not just about the what, it's about the how of the content.
Right.
And about the who, and about the social positioning of how the content is received. Right. I'm not, don't take me arguing that Vibes is Shakespeare. Like, it is not. But also Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare when Shakespeare was written. Shakespeare was like for the rabble to go see and yell at the stage while it was being performed. And we don't really have good language or good intellectual tools for splitting apart those sort of matters of taste.
Yeah.
And so trying to turn them into into what is essentially a technical manual for how to run a big factory to make decisions is like one of the most insane parts of the insane project of content moderation.
Right.
Like, that part is just super duper impossible. Actually, on this point, when we were trying to solve a version of this problem, a very simple version of this problem at Facebook around images, we had said, okay, if it looks like a naked people, it's naked people, take it down. But like Michelangelo's David looks like naked people.
Yep.
And so we needed to figure out how that was fine, because that's in like everybody's photos of every trip that's ever happened that went to Florence. And so taking that down is like both not useful and obviously absurd and not sustainable.
Right.
And the answer we came up with, I don't know if I've told you this story before. The answer we came up with was rocks are not people, so they can't be naked. So the definition of art was for a very long time, things that are made of like paint or sticks or metal or wood, whatever. It's like it's not made of people.
Right.
Right. But it looks like people. That's allowed to be naked because it's not naked because it's not people.
Right.
And that was the distinction that we were able to teach people imperfectly.
Right.
But that worked.
I can see
so the
where
definition of art
fails.
was just naked people made of wood.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it meant, among other things, that there was no art photography.
Right.
So no photography was ever art.
Right. Which seems bad.
I mean, no, it seems like a trade-off.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Right. Because otherwise I'm trying to teach, like, we're in the business of trying to teach 10,000 people to have the same views about what art means. Like, what? Yeah. That's absurd. Like, that's the limit where I'm like, this will never be possible to be done well. That is conceptually impossible. But that is not a thing that can be done.
Right. But then you end up with situations like Facebook famously taking down the Napalm Girl picture.
Yeah. Because if you don't know that that's a Pulitzer Prize winning photo
Right.
and you just describe what you're seeing, you definitely want Facebook to moderate
Right.
that photo unless it's that photo.
Right. Right.
Right. But if you just if you took a description of that photo and put it into an AI chatbot
Yeah.
and we're like, make this, we would want it to not do that.
Right. Yeah. Which gives you a sense of the impossibility.
Yes. One might say.
One might say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm not working on world peace here. I'm just trying to make us better at running the factory.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a very interesting discussion, but let's move on to our slightly more rapid stories. We have another story, which I think is a nice lead-in actually from that one. And in fact, maybe just flows right into it, involving OpenAI's new Sora project. So do you want to give the quick description on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So OpenAI has released a version of Sora. So Sora is their video generation model that's been around in preview for a while. And they've now released a version that sort of has social media features built into the app itself. So it's a move in a direction that feels a little different from where a lot of their software is, which, yes, people use ChatGPT for entertainment, but a lot of it's sort of productivity coded, even if that's not the only thing people are using it for. This feels like much more of a move in the vibes direction of sort of generating AI video essentially purely for entertainment purposes. And there's sort of some interesting features built into it where you can train the model to have a sense of what you look like and then actually control whether or not people can generate videos of you or just you can generate videos of you. And they did some interesting stuff where the models, if they're shared with inside the app the images, if they're shared inside the app are not watermarked, but if you export them, they then attempt to put a watermark on them so people know that they're synthetic. But if you're sort of inside the playground, it's contextually obvious that all this is fake because it's a service for making fake AI videos. Right. So you're in Sora, you know that this isn't real, which was very interesting as a sort of new technology making new presentations possible. Kind of thing. So I was interested in your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, it struck me as interesting, especially coming the week right after Vibes launched, this sort of merging of the AI and social, where Vibes I don't understand at all as this sort of social app that adds AI and it's only for AI. But then for some reason, Sora sort of makes more sense to me. And even though it's kind of a very similar product where it's it's an AI tool for making AI things, but because you're sort of sharing it within that environment, then suddenly it makes more sense to me. And I don't quite fully understand why. But I did also think that
is it sort of a starting place thing where
it must be.
OpenAI makes AI.
Right. And so you expect.
And so it's full of AI.
Right. And so it's sort of
that tracks.
AI with added social, as opposed to social with added AI just feels wrong, but AI with added social feels, even if they're ending up in the same sort of place.
Yeah.
I find that sort of fascinating, and I can't quite wrap my head around why. But I did think the structure, as you talked about, it was interesting too, with the watermarks. Obviously, there are ways around this. Anyone can figure out a way to video capture their screen and get a video out of this without the watermarks. But just the fact that if you're in the app, the expectation is you understand that this is all video AI generated, not true things, and therefore you don't have to watermark it. But if you download it, you get a watermark, which will hopefully alert people outside of this app the context of where it comes from. I thought that was sort of an interesting intervention, if not a perfect one. But the thing that I thought was even more interesting was, and so a lot of the news around it was that, as you mentioned, it allows you to sort of create a model of yourself, and then you can open that up for other people to use. And Sam Altman did that. And so a lot of what the original videos that were getting passed around, including by OpenAI employees, were fake videos of Sam Altman doing stuff. And sort of the one that was most famous was there's this video created of him stealing GPUs from Target to power Sora. And that sort of went viral, where you have
what could go wrong?
Yeah. Right. So you have this immediate, what could go wrong thing, but he released that, the model of himself for people to be able to make that. And it's sort of this, I don't know if it's eating your own dog food kind of thing. sort of beyond that, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, allowing other people to force feed you dog food.
We're making dog foie gras now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is a very interesting moment where I similarly share your sort of lack of understanding of the interest of AI video in most contexts,
Yeah.
right? Like I get TikTok,
Right.
because it's like other people sharing you a window into their lives, and that's like kind of inherently interesting, and it's just like lazier and faster than reading their tweets. Like,
Right.
okay, sure, and they can. It's better for singing because you can sing on
the
video,
singing and
right?
dancing.
There's like, sure,
there's an appeal
got it.
there. Yeah.
But the AI generated video stuff is interesting to me because I would think the most interesting stuff is things you can't make.
Right.
But it does feel like it's interesting. It sort of ties into some of what we were talking about earlier. It does feel like another version of this, like playing with action figures
yes.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Except that like this time it's video action figures,
Yeah.
but they're also real people who opted into being action figures. It's like I don't quite get that. I get why you would want to, I don't know, be like, here's a video of Bigfoot or something that like you wouldn't otherwise have. But it's interesting how that sort of drive towards fictional representation as entertainment intersects with video and intersects with reality.
Yeah.
Which is very, very interesting.
I did think, so there is, as I understand, and I haven't played around with this yet myself, so I don't know exactly the details. The whole thing where you can make your, I don't know even know what they call it, avatar or entity available for others to create with. There is a safety feature built into that, which is that you can then see what other people do with yourself and can pull down. So
that's cool.
So in theory, like Sam Altman could look at that video of him stealing GPUs from Target and kill it within the app.
It feels very difficult to scale that. Like, it's a cool idea.
Right.
But it feels like it works least well for Sam Altman.
Yes. I mean, but with the recognition that he's probably going into this very willingly, and I imagine that most sort of well-known people will not openly share their own models of themselves, or if they do, it'll be under very different conditions. I'm sort of thinking of like, this is, different, but like there was the whole thing that Grimes, the ex of Elon Musk and singer, did like a couple of years ago now, where she created an AI model just of her voice and let anyone use it in music with a contractual condition, which is that if you make any money from this song, you have to cut 50% back to me. And so you can create a Grimes song. She will sing with you. You can put it on Spotify and you can make money on it. And if it is successful, you have to give 50% back to her. And that's kind of interesting to me. Like I find that sort of a fascinating approach to things. And you could see maybe people doing something similar with this sort of thing, where it's like there are conditions on the usage. Like you can use the model of me, but either I need to approve it or there needs to be some sort of licensing or money
conditions
that changes hands. And I could see that being interesting.
I would assume that will end up happening, at least within sort of commercial domains. The interesting question is going to be how much that becomes a normal thing to let just like anybody do. Right. Like I think you're going to end up with these sort of like AI clones of actors and things. And particularly once you start to think about their estates.
Yes.
Right? Because
there's going to be
Morgan Freeman's going to be able to sound amazing for the rest of time.
Yes.
And there's incentives for those kinds of things. And it is actually, this is really far afield, but it's interesting to think about what that does to culture.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's less turnover.
Yeah.
Right. Right now, all of the artistic talent has a finite expiration date. There is a body of work that is made and is ended.
But if we have the immortal Morgan Freeman, then
right, like who will ever narrate documentaries ever again?
Right.
It's just Morgan Freeman forever, and that's probably not good.
Yeah.
I don't know that I love that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. All right, well let's move on to our final story, and this one, the last few episodes of Ctrl-Alt-Speech, we talked about Nepal and sort of trying to take down certain social media networks because of protests and how that was a failure, but a very interesting story. the story I saw this week, it takes place in Afghanistan, where they have just basically said, fuck it, we're turning off the internet.
That is one way to do perfect content moderation.
Yes. There is no more content. There's no more internet. Too fucking bad. And so they basically, like the Taliban, who, rules the country, basically more or less said, well, actually, this is kind of crazy, because what they did was someone went on X, which is a part of the internet, to talk about how they were turning off the internet because the internet is evil.
A notoriously non-evil part of the internet.
Yeah, which is just kind of weird in all sorts of ways. And we're starting to see, there's a BBC article about this where, like, it turns out like the internet is really, really ingrained in lots of things that people do around the globe, including Afghanistan. So when they started to cut the fiber optic lines, like bad stuff is happening. And like flights are not going in and out of Afghanistan anymore. And people who were taking classes online are suddenly like, whoops, like that's gone. Other kinds of services just sort of disappeared. And
I was seeing banking.
Yes.
That like all the banks are down.
Yeah, because it turns out banks actually rely on the internet a fair bit.
Yeah.
And so suddenly they're, strong to do it. And there wasn't like a precipitating event other than the Taliban basically just saying like, we don't like this cultural thing. And so we're going to turn off the internet.
Yeah, it's a particularly crazy moment. That last part in particular is I think is different, right? We've seen, to your point earlier, we've seen countries wall off their own sort of sections of the internet, which, I am not a fan of, but is a solution to the banks need to work. Right. Because it allows the sort of intranetting to happen. And we've seen sort of emergency full shutdown kind of things. Yes. But they're largely in response to like something happened or is happening, like it's going down. So somebody like pulls the plug out. And you're like, okay, I don't like this as a strategy, but like I get how you I'm gonna go unplug it. I got it. Right. Get how that happens.
Is almost always like people rising up against the leader. Sure. Leads to an internet.
And like at that point, you're getting your head chopped off anyway. So you might as well throw some stuff at the wall and see what happens. Yeah. But it is kind of wild to see, to your point, not just them unplug, but like go basically cold turkey. Yeah. Right. Like to just fully, without a lot of preparation seemingly. Yeah. Or real planning for alternative ways of providing services that presumably some of which they think are good and cool. Maybe. I don't know. It's sort of wild. I mean, I can't really think of a precedent for it that doesn't have a specific inciting event.
Yeah. Like literally, I mean, the BBC article says it is unclear what the reason for the shutdown is. And the only thing they seem to have is that post on X of someone saying, we have to cut the fiber optic cables because they're evil. And this also does follow on that they removed all books written by women from the university teaching system, which implies a sort of cultural, like, we don't like modern culture and we're going to block all of it, which is probably not great for a variety of reasons.
No, obviously not. I was a little flip up front about content moderation, but obviously the implications locally are going to be somewhere between bad and horrifying. Yeah. But it is interesting to see what it will lead to, right? Because you could end up with backlash. Yes. Or you end up with adaptation. Right. Right. Because like banks are going to need to exist on some level, right? I don't think you end up in a world where there's like no ability to change money. Yeah. And so there's this broader question of like, okay, are they going into this without planning and then going to figure it out? Or how intentional, frankly, were some of those things? Because like some of those second order consequences seem to me to probably not have been desired. Yeah. Right.
You would think. Yeah. I think this story is really early, and I think is one that we'll sort of have to see where it goes. But
I look forward to you and Ben.
Yes.
Actually explaining what happened,
hashing out this on a future
episode.
But I think with that, we're gonna wrap this one up. Dave, this was a really fun conversation, and
likewise,
I'm glad I was able to drag you in from the event last week. So thanks for taking the time, and hope everybody enjoyed listening as well. And we'll be back next week.
Thanks for listening to Ctrl-Alt-Speech. Subscribe now to get our weekly episodes as soon as they're released. If your company or organization is interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact us by visiting Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. That's Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com.